Hey, this is Charlie Thompson, and I wanted to do another too long didn't read so that you knew which parts of this chapter are more important for testing uh, and which parts are just general background information on ecosystems and soils. So, you got some definitions, good stuff. Ecosystems, groups of plants and animals. Yeah, that's what an ecosystem is. It's a group of plants and animals and the non living stuff that goes on where they are. We'll talk about flows of energy and matter, and those are usually defined by who's being eaten. That's the way energy and matter flow through ecosystems by being eaten. We'll talk about soil, and I'll talk like way more about soil than you're going to get tested on about the soil. I'll talk about how ecosystems are organized. Again, it's by who's eating whom. Like if you just make stuff, that's like the primary level. And then if you eat stuff, you're a consumer. And then if you eat other consumers, you're a secondary consumer. So ecosystems are organized based on who's eating whom. We'll talk about how ecosystems respond to change. So things like climate change that's happening relatively quickly. Other things happen more slowly. Some things happen really quickly, like volcanic eruptions and wildfires. So how do ecosystems respond to change, or new organisms coming in? For example, that's another stressor or an agent of change in an ecosystem. So we'll talk about the living, the biotic, and the non-living abiotic parts of ecosystems. So there's a boatload of terms. What is soil? It's dirt and dead stuff. How are ecosystems organized? By by where you are on the eating chain. How do ecosystems respond to change? Again, it's going to be evolution. It's going to be succession. It's going to be how ponds fill in over time. So starting off with energy flows, we've got a bunch of definitions. Biodiversity, it's the number of different species that live in a place. The more, the merrier. The more different organisms there are, the better off everything is. Diversity is wonderful. Biogeography, it's a definition. It's the study of the distribution of plants and animals in the biosphere over space and time. So, like, where are they now? Where did they used to be? Where do they migrate during a year? There's some things that migrate long distances. Some things that just stay in one place. They're plants. They don't move. Animals, they usually move. Yeah, I was thinking of barnacles. They don't move. Ecosystem, a self-sustaining association of plants and animals and their non-living physical environment. So it's definition. They can be small, they can be big. They got different names. They look different. Savanna. So there's one group. Temperate grassland. It's in America or Canada with bison. Those are our big, huge grazing herbivores. Arctic tundra with reindeer, Rangifer tarandus. It's another grazing herbivore. Temperate marsh, another ecosystem. So energy, this is the way they're organized. Primary producers make stuff, make energy out of sunlight. So those are plants. Consumers are the animals that eat the plants. Other consumers eat other consumers. Decomposers eat the dead stuff. Ecosystems are open to energy and matter, so this is how they flow. Energy flows through an ecosystem by being eaten. It's kind of weird. Biotic components are the living things. Abiotic is the non-living, not necessarily dead, because if it's living, then it's biotic. So biotic actually also covers dead stuff. Abiotic would be the environmental factors. Not biotic living. Like temperature, rainfall, sunlight, all that's abiotic, right? It's not living. It's not dead. It's just not living. So here's how stuff flows through getting eaten. Photosynthesis is how plants eat light. In fact, most of what plants are made of, sugar, carbohydrates, it's water. Where's my pointer? It's water and carbon dioxide. So they like take in air and water and make plant sugar. That's pretty cool. I mean, they need fertilizer. They need other nutrients. They need nutrients. These water, carbon dioxide, light, those aren't nutrients. Things like phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, those things, but in incredibly small amounts. It's most of plant is made up of light and air and water. Pretty magic. So they do it one way and make sugar, and they can also run it backwards to get energy. They can break down sugar in the presence of oxygen, and the waste products are water and carbon dioxide. That's respiration. That's what we do. It's what plants can also do. Energy in ecosystems almost entirely from the sun. There's some really cool ecosystems. I'll try to find some links and put them in the playlist for this chapter of stuff that lives on the bottom of the ocean. So there's no light, and they just do chemosynthesis. They break down chemicals to get energy. Scientists had no idea that they lived where they did, and were completely cut off from the rest of the planet. Like even the decomposers at the very bottom of the ocean, they're breaking down whales and marine snow, bits of dead stuff that floats down eventually. It can take a long time to get to the bottom of the ocean, but most of the things at the bottom of the ocean are just eating dead stuff that drifted there from someplace else, and if you follow the energy back, eventually you get to the sun. Something captured sunlight and made it into sugar, and then something else ate that, and something else ate that, and a fish ate that, and so on and so on. But the chemosynthetic life breaks down hydrogen sulfide compounds in these superheated deep sea thermal vents, like at spreading centers, for example. You'd find these things absolutely cut off from the sun. So if the sun stopped tomorrow, they'd be totally fine. They wouldn't even care until the planet froze over eventually. Amazing. So almost all the energy in ecosystems comes from the sun, ultimately, through photosynthesis. Respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. Here's some cool pictures of a cell, cross-section of a cell with a little chloroplast, a vein that's transferring water and nutrients and sugar, stoma, the little openings that let gas go in and out. I like that picture a lot. Ooh, net primary productivity. It's all the carbon that an ecosystem fixes, usually measured in a year. So it's all the carbon captured by an ecosystem. Biomass is the total weight of organic matter of an ecosystem. Kind of cool. In a redwood forest, the biomass in dead trees is greater than the biomass of the living trees. There's so many decomposers and fungi in redwood forests that are breaking down dead trees. They actually weigh more than all the living stuff in the living trees. Yeah, it's time for a video. I hope you enjoy it. It's net primary productivity, or it's primary productivity. So you're seeing the greener it is, the more carbon is being removed from plants on a scale of 0 to 10 grams. And it's kind of weird. They did millions of grams per square kilometer, and I think the math on that works out to grams per square meter. So like 10 grams per square meter pretty much year-round in the tropics with the ITCZ overhead. So you can see the ITCZ shifting. Got the Asian monsoon going on in their summer, but the really most dramatic is the mid and high latitude greening. And that's temperature and day length, right? Because it's frozen in the wintertime and above the Arctic Circle. So above here, there's absolutely nothing, no light in the winter, and then everything just goes crazy in the summertime. Compare that with the southern hemisphere, not a whole lot of change. Australia greens up in the north. There's some coastal stuff in southern Africa. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, this is annual. So this is everything it makes in a year in grams of carbon per square meter per year, ranging from 0, like parts of the Sahara, parts of Saudi Arabia, parts of the American West, the deserts, right? And then you got the rainforests with 1,200 grams of carbon. So what's that, like 3 pounds? They're making 3 pounds of carbon per square yard is the English equivalent of that in the tropics. Good job, tropics. Biogeochemical cycles, oxygen and the carbon cycle. We talked about the carbon cycle as part of climate change with sinks and flux. So this is all review. photosynthesis. The uptake in photosynthesis is basically equal to the amount released in decomposition and respiration. So photosynthesis pretty much equal to respiration, decomposition and respiration, but then humans are adding more carbon. Nitrogen's pretty cool. I talk a lot about nitrogen. The most important thing about nitrogen is 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen, but plants can't use that. It's going in and out of them, and it just goes in and out. Bacteria make nitrogen from the atmosphere into nitrates that plants can use. So nitrogen fixing bacteria and lightning strikes and industrial fertilizers are how we make nitrogen fertilizer. Mostly it's nitrogen fixing bacteria though. Nitrogen, if you make synthetic fertilizers, it's generally just bad. And then farmers put on too much fertilizer and then it runs into the ocean. And the algae goes crazy and then they die off. And when they're dead, they're not making oxygen. And the decomposers that eat the dead algae, they go nuts and they use up all the oxygen. So there's these big areas off the Louisiana coast because they're over-fertilizing the plain states that if fish swim into these areas, they just die because there's no oxygen. Soil, absolutely fascinating. I'll talk a lot about soil. Here's what you need to know. It takes a long time to make soil, 500 years for an inch. Flat places have better soil than steep places. Duh. Shady places are going to get more organic material because it's by dead stuff getting decomposed and added back to the soil. That's how you get good soil. So places that don't have a lot of plants don't have good soil. It could be a positive feedback loop, right? If they had better soil, they'd get better soil. They'd get better soil. But they can't have better soil because they have bad soil. It's a catch-22. 500 years for an inch of topsoil. We've lost half the topsoil in the American plains since the 1960s or so. We're losing more topsoil today than we are during the Dust Bowl. It's just getting washed away, not blown into the air, so nobody notices. But it's a huge, huge tragedy. It's a result of industrial farming. There's erosion. That's bad. This is native prairie vegetation. This is wheat. Look at those piddly, puny, pathetic roots. Those are some roots, man. Good job, prairie. Yeah, prairie plants are hella good at making good roots that then keep the soil in place. They can get more water, so they don't need as much water. They're just good. Talk about desertification and what a problem that is. It's when places become more deserty. Not like the climate changes, it's just that plants don't grow. Bunch of reasons. Talk about soil. Soil's totally fascinating. I'm probably not going to ask you questions on what the different layers are. Like, I'm not going to ask you, like, the difference between the B and C layer. No, that's not really super important. But I might. But I probably won't. But you should still listen to that part of the lecture video and read the part in the book. Soil, different things we measure about soil. I'm not going to ask you about any of these. None of them. It's totally fascinating, totally amazing. I'm not going to ask you. No. Physical properties? No. Chemical properties? No. No. Totally fascinating. Energy pathways. Now we're into food webs. Great chain of life, you know. This eats that. You got stuff making stuff. Those are producers. If you're eating something, you're a consumer. Primary consumers eat producers. Secondary consumers eat primary consumers. Tertiary consumers eat secondary consumers. That's pretty much it. Primary producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. That's it. It just means first, second, third. Food webs, it's the way they really work. They're not just like a line. Energy pyramids. Yeah, most of the energy is lost in heat from just, existing. So the more levels, this is why they're usually like 3 to 6, because the top dog is getting a 10th, is getting a 10th, is getting a 10th. So by the time you get up that many layers, there's very little energy available. It's why big predators are rare, because it takes a lot of stuff to. If you're a carnivore, you got to eat a lot of herbivores, and eat a lot of herbivores. The herbivores have to eat a lot of grass, so it's just a numbers game. That's why there's, the ratio of lions to wildebeest is what it is, because most of the energy is lost going from one level to the next level. Oh yeah, so the energy's lost, but the pesticides stick around. So the more things you eat that eat things, the more pesticides you have. It's better to eat low on the food chain. Communities, bunch of new words. Communities, a group of plants and animals in a place. Habitats where they live. Niche is their job. Habitat is their home. Niche is their job. Talk about evolution. Try to put up some good videos on evolution. I love talking about evolution. It just works. Niche, it's what that thing does. It's like what it eats. So these two birds exist in the same habitat, but they have different niches because this one walks down the tree, eating bugs, and this one walks up the tree, eating bugs. So they eat different bugs, so they can exist in the same habitat because they don't have the same niche. Interactions, different ways that species can interact. Like they can hang out and both of them benefit. That's mutualism. One benefits, one's harmed. Parasitism. Commensalism, one gets better and the other one just doesn't care. So, yeah. And then examples like lichen, made up of fungus and algae. That's mutualism. Parasitism, mistletoe, whatever. Disturbances, yeah. Distribution, sorry. Species interaction distribution. So these are things that affect where organisms live. Like if it's frozen or too hot, nothing's going to live there. If it's too wet, different things would live there. If there's no water, nothing lives there. Water quality, like the clarity, how much sediment can affect. Like different species have different water quality needs. There's some species they call keystone species or indicator species, and those are species, if they're there, the ecosystem is healthy because of their needs. If they're happy, everybody else is happy because they're like the pickiest. There's some lichens that they can use, for example, to measure air pollution, that they need good air quality. If they don't have air quality, they die. Life zones, that's where things live at different elevations or latitudes, which is just another way of saying temperature, right? So tropical rainforest, you can go up in elevation and it gets colder. So you could be at the equator and go from tropical rainforest all the way up to polar climate just by going up in elevation. Same way works with latitude, going from the equator to the tropics. So they kind of, latitude, altitude, both the high places, high latitude and high elevation are cold. Limiting factor, it's what restricts the range of species. Like coast redwood needs summer fog, red maple apparently doesn't really care about a whole lot. And if you can live in a wide variety of places, you probably will. Disturbance. Now disturbance and succession, how things change over time. Yeah. Wildfires, talk a lot about wildfires. We've done a very bad job with forests, so we get catastrophic huge fires. We're trying to go back to a more nature-based observing, studying, learning from nature. Nature does a good job of forests take care of themselves if you leave them alone, but we've messed them up. If we leave them alone, so now we got to mess them up more and have little fires and thin them so that we don't get these catastrophic fires. Succession is going from bare rock to communities. If there's bare rock, that's called primary succession. If there's bits left over like soil, it's secondary succession. Like volcanic eruptions, that's primary succession. Fires usually are secondary succession because there's stuff living in the soil. Plants often live underground, so that's secondary succession. Starting from scratch, primary. Got leftovers, secondary succession. Mount St. Helens, classic example of succession. Oh, aquatic succession. Yeah, it just goes from a pond to a field to a forest as stuff dies and fills it in. Stability is how hard it is to tip it over, or how much it tips over on its own. Resilience is how easily it bounces back. Those are two different ideas. I'm probably not going to test you on it. You should just know that diversity is good. Diversity improves resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. Like rainforest is stable and it doesn't really bounce back well. Like if you cut down the rainforest and clear it, what grows back probably isn't going to be rainforest like what was there before. On the other hand, prairie grasslands that have evolved with fire are resilient. So it's going to bounce back and be just fine. So this is another example of secondary succession because these grasses, the top part got burned off, but the rest is fine. Yeah, we're killing off species because we're taking their land and chopping up their land into little tiny pieces that they can't use, and the land that's left we're polluting. So that sucks. They're dying off at a rate that hasn't been seen since the last mass extinction, which also killed the dinosaurs, the last mass extinction. Yeah. Biodiversity, the tropics have huge, high numbers. Red, good job, tropics. Dry places, cold places, low biodiversity. This would be number of different species. That's a rad map. I'll try to find some other examples of just like amphibian biodiversity, because this is just like everything, which is probably plants, maybe some insects. But different like mammals have a different pattern. Oh, and bees. I just posted the bees, right? The species richness of bee diversity. Rad story about Yellowstone. They got rid of the wolves and the park wasn't as healthy. The coyotes took over, the elk took over and ate everything. So then they brought the wolves back, which ate half the elk. But then we got pronghorns. Oh, and they also chased out a lot of the coyotes. And end result, there's more birds, there's more insects, there's more mammals, there's grizzlies, there's pronghorn, half as many elk, but everybody else is stoked. There's some good videos. I put up a short video and a long video. Enjoy that. And that's it for the chapter. I hope you enjoyed the longer video. It's got a lot of content, really good.